Just Energy with naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theories that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swing of a pendulum to the waves in the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. In the same way, things such as rocks and minerals vibrate very slowly and at speeds that are imperceptible to us. Living things such as plants, animals, and man vibrate faster and appear to be alive. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is if we take everything in our own universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita as she explores questions such as, what are we made of? Why do we get sick? How can I live a more balanced and whole life? Call in and talk to her and her thought-provoking guest. Send us your questions and get the help you need to move beyond any obstacle or challenges that may be affecting your life, right from the source. So stay tuned and explore your possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Today we're going to be talking to Nick Redfern about his new book, The NASA Conspiracy, and we're going to find out, what is NASA hiding? Just to let you know, Just Energy Radio has just been picked up by Fate Radio. That's fateradio.com, so you can listen to the show both on Blog Talk Radio, Fate Radio, or you can listen to the archives on justenergyradio.com. We've also started posting the shows on, well, actually they're available on iTunes, and we've started posting some of the shows on YouTube. So if you want to, if you're a YouTuber, check it out there too. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you too can learn to become an energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or certified medical intuitive. That's appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. To keep informed of our upcoming show schedule, which we have some killer shows coming up, please visit www.justenergyradio.com and sign up for our free newsletter. You can also see the upcoming show schedule as well as access over 4 years. That's 4 years of archives at no cost to you. They're all free for you to download and listen to at your leisure. So our next guest, Nick Redfern, I've been joking around on my end that I think I'm just going to set up a cot here at Just Energy Radio because he keeps writing these really killer new books, and I have him on because his books are so cool, and we have to talk about them. And so he's on again. He has another brand new book, The NASA Conspiracies. Let me tell you a little bit about Nick, and we'll get him on the air. Originally from England, Nick Redfern is the author of many books on UFOs, aliens, Bigfoot, werewolves, the Loch Ness Monster, paranormal phenomena, conspiracy theories, psychic powers, and Hollywood scandals. His titles include Contactees, Memoirs of a Monster Hunter, A Covert Agenda, Strange Secrets, Three Men Seeking Monsters, The FBI Files, Celebrity Secrets, Cosmic Crashes, There's Something in the Woods, Science Fiction Secrets, On the Trail of Saucer Spies, Body Snatchers in the Desert, and Monkey Man, or Man Monkey. So anyway, please welcome to Just Energy Radio from NickRedfern.com, Nick Redfern. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hi, Rita. I'm doing good, thanks. Good to speak to you again.
So what do you think about the idea that I just set up a cot for you here?
Well, actually, I do have another book coming out in June, so it might not be a bad idea.
Well, that's what I heard, and I'm like, God, I'm just going to put a cot here. But your books are always so good, and I love having you on the show. You're great to talk to, so I don't even have a problem with that concept.
All right, good. Well, thanks.
one of the things I am so excited about is that you and I are finally going to get to meet in person, live, up close and personal, tomorrow at the History, Haunts, and Legends Conference.
We are indeed. That's in Jefferson, Texas, all day tomorrow. So.
All day tomorrow. What are you going to be speaking on?
Well, I'm going to be speaking about a strange story, one of my earlier books called Final Events, which is a study of a think tank group in the government that investigated UFOs and came to a conclusion that rather than having alien origins, that the phenomenon is more occult-based, if you like. So I'm going to be talking about that and how and why they came to associate UFOs with things like jinns and demons rather than literal aliens. It's sort of a very strange and weird story when you realize how and why the government was literally funding this group to look into these sort of more esoteric and disturbing angles in some respects, I guess.
Are they saying that the jinns and whatever are aliens, or are they saying they're not?
No, they're saying that the group believes that the whole UFO phenomenon, if you like, is kind of deceptive, and we're being sort of lulled into a sense of security, if you like, but a faked one by entities that sort of masquerade as alien to sort of get their grips into us. But the group concluded they were literally like occult negative creatures, something along those lines, if you like. So it's a very, very sort of weird
and that wouldn't be alien of one kind.
No, it wouldn't be aliens of any sort. The group literally concluded that we've never had extraterrestrial visitations. They concluded that we have had very real visitations, but from these so-called occult entities as they sort of perceive them.
Okay.
Kind of when you go through history, you see sort of tales of negative entities like jinns and demons and that sort of thing, and that's literally how the group views the phenomenon. So that's what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow.
Well, and there are a lot of people that actually support that theory, like Rudolf Steiner supports that theory, where he talks about beings, entities, beings that don't necessarily live in this three-dimensional world that are able to come into this dimension and interact with people that we view as gods that aren't, that great.
Yeah,
they're not as highly advanced.
No, that's exactly how this group views the entire thing, that it's they literally are sort of dimensional entities rather than extraterrestrial. But, as I point out to people, and as I'll be stressing in the lecture, just because these people are in government and came to this conclusion doesn't mean it's right. The important thing I'm stressing is this isn't my viewpoint that I'm sort of hammering home to the audience. For me, the fascinating thing is the fact that a group was established in the government to look into it. So I'm going to stress, this is their belief system, it's not mine, but talk about how and why they reached the conclusions they reached, and then people can, judge for themselves as to whether they feel this Pentagon group was accurate in its conclusions or not. So.
You'll have to bring me a copy of that book. That sounds it's one that I don't have that we haven't done a show on, but you'll have to bring me one. That sounds really interesting.
Alrighty. Yeah, it's probably more weird than. It is interesting, but it's more weird than straightforward, if you like.
I like weird. Actually, I'm doing a lot of research on weird, so it would just add to my research on
Weird's good.
Weird. Yeah. Your new book, The NASA Conspiracies, when did that come out?
That came out in December of last year, so it's been out about 5 months, something like that. I try and do about a book every 6 or 7 months, something along those lines.
I was thinking, God, I'm really behind the power curve on this, but I think when I had you on last, you had just come out with the book with Ken, the Monster
Monsters of Texas
book.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, dang, Nick, another book. You were just on like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, I've got another one out in June, which is called The Real Men in Black, and it's a history of a study of the entire Men in Black phenomenon. So.
Well, we'll have you on for that. Don't worry. Right. I'm starting to schedule September already, so it's like I'll just pencil.
Oh, that'll be all right.
Okay. let's start talking about this book. When I think of NASA and conspiracies, the first thing that comes to my mind is the whole space program. There's been a lot of talk about, did we really land on the moon, or was that just really a giant hoax? Mm-hmm. From your research, what have you discovered?
Well, I mean, there's two things I can tell you. One is that, there's absolutely no doubt that there's a huge market that does believe we did not go to the moon, not just in terms of books, but also just whole swathes of the population that don't believe. For example, in 1999, a Gallup poll was created all across the country to poll the U.S. population to the biggest extent possible to determine their views on did we or did we not go to the moon. And when the results came back and the analysis was done, it was shown that approximately 18 million Americans did not believe we went to the moon. 18 million is a substantial number of people. It's a huge number of people. And bear in mind, this was just a US-based poll as well, never mind other countries. So, in other words, there is this deep belief we didn't go. Now, when I was writing the book, I called it the NASA Conspiracies, primarily because it was a study of conspiracy theories relative to NASA. And some of the conspiracy theories I think are valid, and others I don't. And in terms of the moon landing, I actually do think we did go. I personally think there are enough good explanations to offer an explanation for some of the anomalies that people have brought up, which are often brought up because the person bringing it up may not have a full understanding or a grasp of the science that actually exists to explain what they see as anomalies. So in other words, I think when we dig into some of these conspiracies, like the moon landings, it demystifies them. But on other occasions, it just mystifies them even further. So, I tried to approach the entire issue of NASA's involvement in various phenomena with an open mind, rather than thinking, all these conspiracies are clearly valid and I'm going to validate them, come hell or high water. That wasn't the case. I tried to take an investigative journalistic approach and just see where the evidence falls. And I think in the moon landings, I think it does fall in NASA's court. But I will be the first to admit, that there's a massive amount of people who believe we simply did not go. Or that, we weren't told the full story. A lot of people kind of, they have this side view that, okay, we went, but maybe we haven't seen all the photographs, and there are rumors about UFOs supposed having been seen on the moon in the Apollo missions, and classified pictures of them having been taken, which we've never obviously seen. So, it isn't just as clear, the conspiracy about the moon landings isn't just as clear a cut of as if did we go or didn't we, but you have these sort of offshoots of it as well.
How far back does this conspiracy go? I first started hearing about it 3-5 years ago. I'm going to say, as far as the moon landing is concerned, fairly recently. Does it go back to when they actually went up in 1969, or when the space program started in 1969?
Yeah, it was 1969, July, when Apollo 11 landed on the moon. It doesn't actually go back to then, but it does go back to the mid-'70s. The earliest real sort of reference that got a lot of publicity came when a man named Bill Kaysing published a book called We Never Went to the Moon. It was like a self-published booklet type thing he put together. And he actually worked in the rocket industry, and that was one of the reasons why his booklet provoked so much interest, because he was kind of like an insider. Now, he didn't have information, like sort of secret insider information saying, hey, I know where it was filmed, etc. He was questioning whether or not the technology and the capabilities existed to successfully send people to the moon, land them, and have them come home again. That's what he was asking. Was it budget-wise, was it possible? Technologically wise, was it possible? And also, just to ensure that nothing went wrong, period. What were the chances of that? And it did certainly open a lot of people's eyes to the notion that we didn't go. And then, of course, in 1978, a Hollywood movie was released called Capricorn 1, which was kind of similar to the moon landing scenario, but it basically dealt with the first manned mission to Mars, where something goes wrong and NASA's forced to hoax the mission because the rocket wouldn't make it back to Mars and back, and they'd invested so much money in it, and it was sort of a prestigious event, so they hoaxed it. And that got people talking as well. Well, okay, it's a Hollywood film, but could it really have occurred? So it's things like this in the mid to late 70s. That literally is how far it goes back. But you're quite right. The reason why there's been more talk in the last few years is because it's really been only about the last decade or so that this subject's really been dealt with at a deeper level. And, of course, with things like the Internet, the story starts spreading far and wide then when people post footage on imagery of the moon, etc., and they start analysing the pictures. The story soon spreads around the world.
I have to tell you, last summer we went to Houston to NASA Space Center, and they had a Saturn V rocket on display, and it was opened up, parts of it, and there were all these electronic boxes, that were, the covers weren't on all of them, and you would see these, like, rickety PC boards with giant capacitors and resistors on it, and you think of today's technology and go, God, how could they have possibly have done that? Where's the hamster cages to make the engines go? I mean, it was kind of amazing.
Oh, yeah, I mean, what a lot of people don't realize, the Saturn V rockets that went to the moon, when they're stood upright, they're huge. But the only part, really, that is of any significance in terms of the astronauts is the lunar module that lands and the capsule which they sit in when they take off. The entire rest of the body of the rocket pretty much just contains fuel to get the rocket into space, because, that's the big drawback with rocket-based technology. You expend so much energy to launch a very small object into space. Like the module, the capsule that the astronauts sat in on takeoff, it's barely the size of a truck. In fact, probably smaller than a truck. So in other words, you have this huge, massive rocket having to launch this little thing into space. So it was like a dicey mission. People don't realize how sort of hit and miss things could have been. They had to calibrate properly where the moon would be, because of the orbit of the moon around the Earth. You don't just aim for the moon. You have to aim where the moon's going to be, 3 days later, which is how long it took them to get to the moon. And then, of course, the moon's traveling around the Earth. So you don't go from point A to point B. You go where the moon will be in 3 days' time. So any sort of little mistakes, in calculations, etc., would have been just disastrous. And people thought it was highly advanced technology, which for the time it was. But today, you would think, wow, it's amazing they actually did make it.
I've heard that the amount of electronic technology they had on the craft was equal, all right, our cell phones today would put it in the dust. They were saying, early calculators that add and subtract and maybe did square root had more technology than that whole system did back in the 60s.
That's one of the wild things. Back then computers were so big and slow and cumbersome, that we would laugh at them today. Back then they were like the greatest things since the wheel. And I'm sure 40 years from now, people are going to be laughing at us, sitting at home with computers. We'll probably have inbuilt computers in our arms or something like that. You know what I mean? And, we'll be sort
little
of
contact lens heads-up displays.
Yeah, we may well have things like that where we become integrated, with machines to a degree. And I think this shows the advances of technology. But I mean, in terms of the issue of whether the technology got us there or not, I think it did. I mean, there's several reasons why I do think we went to the moon. One is the fact that the astronauts brought back with them a substantial amount of moon rock. And now a lot of this moon rock has been independently analysed outside of NASA, by agencies who have no vested interest in upholding the notion that we went if we didn't. And the rock is clearly not terrestrial rock. It's definitely, from another world. So I think that's a good point, that, we have the rock evidence. And also, a lot of the Apollo missions, although there was obviously a big scientific push to get there, because this was the height of the Cold War, there was a big push to try and trump the Russians, like in a psychological issue at the height of the Cold War, because the Russians had launched the first satellite into space, Sputnik, they launched the first animal in space, and they put the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. So in other words, and the first woman in space. So in other words, the only way America could trump those three things, the people in space, animals in space, and even a rocket in space, would be to land people on the moon. And I think if it had been hoaxed, and we know that the Russians were secretly monitoring the missions, if the Russians even had the slightest inkling that the landings had been hoaxed, they would have come out and said so, because it would have been so damaging to the U.S. morale and space program that, it could have brought down the government if it was proven just to be a big hoax. So that's something, again, that leads me to believe the missions really did go ahead, that it would be, because the Russians would have said, hey, we can prove this didn't happen, because it would have been so much to their benefit to do so. But the fact that they didn't, to me, suggests that we did go. So.
The two biggest ongoing questions that I keep hearing regarding the moon missions are the one, mysterious moving flag, and then the issue regarding the lack of stars in the sky. Has NASA ever responded to these concerns?
Yeah, in terms of the stars, the way you have to look at it, NASA's response is, and I think it is a valid one, is that, the moon is a dead world. It's in a vacuum. So when you have a vacuum, you have no atmosphere. When you have atmosphere, it clouds the skies. You get clouds, and when you don't have an atmosphere, there's nothing to, darken the skies or, make it difficult to see. So normally you see the stars. However, we are, to a degree, we're shielded by the sun to a degree, by the atmosphere and by clouds and things like that. On the moon, you're not shielded from anything. There's no clouds, there's no atmosphere, and the distance from the moon to the Earth is not very far. So when you're on the surface of the moon, the sun is pretty much the same size that it is here. Now, if you imagine being on the surface of the moon and seeing the sun the size as it is here, and no clouds and no atmosphere to stop the sun penetrating through, you're seeing it literally in all its glory, far clearer and more delineated and brighter than you see it on the Earth, because we have the atmosphere that clouds it, etc. So in other words, when the sun is shining on the moon's surface, it's incredibly bright. And, it's kind of like here on Earth in the day. The stars are still up there, but because, there's the sun's shining brightly, we don't see the stars. It's only when the sun goes down at night that we see the stars. It's not like they've suddenly appeared from somewhere. It's just the sky's got darker, so they appear. We can see them, and that's the same on the moon. Is that you have daylight on the moon. It's not like the moon is perpetually nighttime. And so in other words, NASA's argument is that because you have the cameras are using flashes to take photographs, and a lot of people don't realize that you're not just taking a picture on the moon, you're taking a picture with a camera flash. Well, if you point a camera up at the sky with a flash, and you've also got the sun bearing down, NASA's argument is that it whites out the little stars. But the irony is that a lot of people who say, well, you can't see the stars, fail to point out that you can see the Earth, you can see the sun. It's just the very smaller pinprick size stars that you can't see. It's not like everything suddenly mysteriously vanished from the skies in the pictures. It's just the much smaller things. Now, in terms of the flag issue, this is an interesting one, because when the Apollo 11 astronauts landed on the moon, they plant the flag, and as they're handling it, it seems to move and shake. And of course, in a vacuum, you have no atmosphere, which means you have no wind. So there shouldn't be anything on the surface of the moon to create wind. And so people have argued that, well, this must mean it was filmed on Earth if the flag waves. The problem is that most of the footage that's been put on the internet only shows the flag when the astronauts are handling it, when they're planting it. And that's when it does move, where they're actually maneuvering the pole and maneuvering the flag into place. If you look at the full raw footage, which goes on for about 29 minutes, the flag only moves when the astronauts are handling it. For the other 27 minutes or so, it doesn't move even in the slightest while it's in view, which you would expect on the moon. But the problem is when you go to sites and you look at the flag waving issue, most of the time it's cut off right after they plant it, so you don't get to appreciate the full picture. You just think, wow, that's really weird, that flag's moving. But as you'll see, if you see the whole thing, you see it is literally only moving when the astronauts touch it. It doesn't move at any other time at all.
Well, that's good to know. and as you were talking, I was thinking about it and going, yeah, they only ever show like one film clip. They don't show on any of the other landings the same event.
No, and people assume that's all the footage there is. It's kind of ironic. People say, well, the flag moves, and the reason they say that is because yes, it does. But most people haven't had the benefit of seeing the whole thing, because most of the sites that promote the idea we didn't go don't put the entire footage on, because if you see the entire footage, it puts things in a very different light. The fact that, as I said, it doesn't move slightly after the astronauts leave it alone.
So you think we've gone to the moon. That's pretty cool. And you talked about the moon rocks. Is there any other evidence other than the moon rocks that they brought back?
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one significant area a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of is that, in outer space there's a lot of dangers like radiation, and people have to be careful. You need shielding, etc., when you go into space. And what we've found is that a number of the Apollo astronauts now have started to develop, in the last 10, 15 years, have started to develop quite significant cataracts on their eyes, which is a classic example of exposure to significant amounts of radiation. And so, in other words, that's another good pointer that they went, because they're starting to, we're seeing far more than you would see in the average number of people developing cataracts. And so, I think that's a good argument to suggest that, they were affected by the rigors of radiation, which was one of the big concerns that NASA had.
There are people that say, well, they couldn't have gone to the moon because of the Van Allen belt and them making it through the radiation that is in that belt around the Earth.
Well, people haven't so much said you couldn't do it. They've said you couldn't do it without coming back damaged. But the very fact that a number of the astronauts have got cataracts who went, to me, that is a pointer that they were damaged. That the argument is actually correct. That if you try and attempt this, you're going to risk your health, and there's evidence that did happen. So.
Oh, not because they're old, but that's said in a very loving way. No,
they're not. What, sorry? But, sorry, I missed that.
It's not because they're old.
Well, no, no.
Older.
This is one of the important things. Is that for a small group of people, the cataract level is greater than you'd expect to see. Say for example, if you targeted 10 people or 15 people working in one branch of Walmart, and they'd all been worked in one particular part of Walmart for 10 years, and they all got cataracts. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Mm-hmm. It would be beyond coincidence. It would have to be a link, and that's the thing that people have said. It's not the age issue of the people. It's the fact that they were all working on one specific project, went to one specific place, and have all developed this same problem, if you like, with cataracts. So, I think it's the sort of preponderance of the cataracts in a number of people, all in one significant location, clearly delineated. So.
It's a statistically significant event. Nick, the music's going to come on here for us to take a break. When we come back, maybe we could talk about, like, if the astronauts had any kind of encounters with UFOs or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
Sound good?
Yep.
Okay, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're talking to Nick Redfern about his new book, The NASA Conspiracies. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.